What's going on, Daniel? What's happening?
I'm here to haunt you with a lack of new first-run horror movies this year. Woo!
You sure about that? I got a couple right here.
Oh, okay. Let's go over these then.
Within this old house live two residents. One of them is John Russell, composer, professor. The other has been dead for over 70 years.
Reeling from the tragic loss of his wife and daughter, composer John Russell moves across the country to try and reset his life. The least sketchy historical society ever puts him up in an old mansion, and it is not long before strange things start to occur. But that's not the Seattle freeze sending chills down John's spine. No, he's encountered the only thing in town scarier than umbrellas, the Mariners' postseason track record, or the prospect of people playing pickleball in a public park. A spooky ghost. Tragedy is trapped in this space, doomed to repeat in a cycle as the spirit may case the grounds from the Cascades to Puget Sound, but it is not permitted to leave. As John tries to unravel the meaning behind the haunting, he stumbles upon a dark episode in local history that people in high places would prefer to remain off the public record.
This was actually a new watch for me this year. You recommended we watch this and Crimson Peak together and kind of like a dialogue. It should be kind of like a new thing for this channel. But I'm really excited to kind of dig into this because these are two very fascinating movies that have a lot in common. It'll be interesting kind of parse that out here.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting things about film is like how do films influence one another? How can they come into dialogue? I know in this one, Del Toro was explicitly influenced by Peter Medak's The Changeling and came up to him at the BAFTAs one year and was like, "You're my mentor," and he was like, "Who the fuck is what?" But it's a very literal occurrence of that. But you know, it's always interesting to see kind of where things are in harmony with one another and how they kind of spin off that, especially in such a specific genre as like the ghost story or the Gothic ghost story.
Yeah, so we can get into The Changeling, and this came out 1980. And let me go to my little notes here. I got my notes. So when this movie opens, so we see John Russell, famous composer. He's on a big trip with his wife and daughter, and then they are killed in a road accident. And a few months later, he moves to Seattle. He takes up lecturing at the university. He's living in this historical house, like you described. And he starts to hear these haunting things. This ghost is trying to get his attention. He's drawn to this attic room that's been boarded up, and it's all furnished for a child. He starts to investigate, and he catches the eye of a senator who's connected to the terrible crime that happened there. And one thing I'll say right off the bat, like kind of before we get into the thematic stuff, just talking about the filmmaking in general, like this was an exquisitely shot movie. Like, oh my god.
Yeah, I think both of these films, there's a lot to kind of deal with in terms of like style and formal elements that they use. Like you have a really hefty kind of meaty genre story to tell, and you can really use a lot of interesting techniques here. I think the score is really interesting. I think that his usage of subjectivity in camera language is interesting. There's a lot to kind of appreciate here.
Yeah, and I think he hit upon a really good aspect here that I want to kind of highlight, this idea of like using this as genre fiction and everything to tell these stories. Because this is one of the things I really love about these really well-made genre films, because it becomes more than just, oh, the ghost is scary. It can be used to accentuate, to highlight the real story beneath it, you know, because it's not just a story about a ghost haunting a house. It's a story about a man who got everything in his life through ill means, through shady subterfuge and murder, and he's not even aware of it, and that comes back to haunt him literally.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have the this will be full spoilers obviously from top to bottom.
It came out in 1980
with great. Yeah, exactly. You had 43 years to deal with it, and a few less years, but still a lot of time between Crimson Peak and now. But yeah, no, you have like this guy who's kind of in this position of power who got it through illegitimate means, and then you also have a man who is haunted by his own personal tragedy. This is about processing grief, and Crimson Peak is about this kind of Gothic romance and stuff. So yeah, it's these stories are really heightened and stuff, but they're about these very simple, fundamental human tragedies.
Absolutely. And I feel like what's really interesting, though, is the different kinds of themes that these movies play with. And we'll get more into that as we get more in depth. So focusing back on the Changeling, and actually kind of like circling back real quickly, because I just want to make, like, there's kind of talk about the cinematography of the movie and everything.
Yeah, no, you brought up the style elements. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. There was one shot, and actually I put this in a message to you before. I just want to put this out here. Now, there's this one shot that is so incredible. When they first come into the house, you know, obviously you have to have the showing off the house scene. You know, it's like, oh, look at this crazy, spooky house that spooky things are going to happen in. And there's this one shot I really like where they're coming into the music room. And it's this low shot from like right near the floor. And usually low shots are used to convey the sense of power in the subject. Because like it's looking down, looking up at what the subject is, sense of power. But here it's framed just right so that they still appear so small. And instead it magnifies the room around them. And it makes them appear even smaller and the house even bigger. And it's just this really incredible shot that I just saw it and I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, there George C. Scott is like overwhelmed rather than imposing, and kind of he doesn't quite know what he's in for just yet, but he'll learn soon enough.
Oh yes. And another thing that I thought was a really interesting thing that this movie did, again, just kind of playing with the genre stuff. There was this really interesting touch because you have the usual, like, there's scary noises, you know, there's doors slamming, things like that. But what I really liked was, John Russell, he's a composer, and he composes this piano music, and he's playing it. He's like, oh, I've created this new tune. And then when he finds the secret attic room, there's a music box in there. He opens it up and plays a tune. And that's the same tune that he thought he had been inventing. And I thought that was a really interesting way to show this haunting starting to, I guess, like, permeate into him.
Yeah, he's this figure who's, like, kind of primed to receive this sort of message of tragedy. The ghost is, like, as with a lot of these stories, like, trying to communicate something, but it's almost a mystery in a sense, because you're getting these outcries of these beats of the tragic event that kind of created this apparition, except it's not very articulate at getting its message across. And so here, yeah, you have like the music boxes. The lullaby is really key in the murder. Like, it kind of gets opened up during the killing, and he is like a musical individual, and he is also, you know, versed in tragedy at this point with the death of his wife and daughter, and so it kind of sublimates these two elements in a really interesting way. And I think kind of the movie is able to take that and run with it, not only with the lullaby itself, but also with the way that it uses the score. Like, the music in the non-diegetic, the stuff that's not like performed by him or like heard in the actual like scene, is also really piano heavy. So it really kind of creates this sort of room for ambiguity, where is this music coming from the world of the film, or is it coming from the overall atmosphere that we as viewers are supposed to kind of perceive and take in? And that it's really exquisite and deliciously interesting to me.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I noticed that as well with the piano music and the way that would like flow into, again, the like the score there, the soundtrack that we hear, and I was like, oh, that's there's this other part where like it'll be cut in a way where they cut between like memories and the real experience, or like what someone is seeing in their mind versus what's happening in the real world, especially near the end there. And again, like, you know, spoilers, like if you want to see this, like definitely we recommend seeing it. It's actually free on YouTube, I found out.
I have the Blu-ray from Severance, so I sank $30 some odd into it, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's like I rented it on Amazon. By the way, shout out to Amazon. The subtitles for Amazon, the quality control there for spelling skis, like snow skis, as skies. Interred, like interred into a tomb, and spelling that as entered. And the cessation of World War I being spelled the succession of World War I.
Again, AI is coming for us all. The creator was right.
Well, luckily we know we can defeat AI with a spelling bee. Hey, what were we talking about before we went there? Okay, yeah. So like near the end of the actually we'll come back to that once we get through the main meat here, I guess you could say. Also, the seance scene, I was really into that. That was a really good moment there. Yeah, the where you know, medium, she's like, it's like the part where like she's like doing like a literal ghostwriter.
The automatic writing, yeah. And it's just like, I don't know if she blinked at all during the entire thing, because basically he starts to have weird things happen to him. He goes to his buddy at, like, apparently the UW has like a giant psychic research department, which is new to me. That's fine as an alumnus, like maybe they closed in the 80s or something, but yeah, so he's like, yeah, this could be happening, and recommends a medium who will go to the house and start to try to contact the spirit inhabiting the place. They think it's this young girl who died in a car accident, and it turns out not to be entirely true.
Right.
But it's a very, like, low-key scene. Like, she's just scribbling on a paper and starting to, like, as she receives messages, writing words. It's really intense.
And I think that's what I like about it, because, you know, there's, especially nowadays, there's a lot of pressure, like, oh, you have to have the most shocking seance scene. So there's going to be, like, flashing lights and stuff will be, like, going crazy. But here it's, like you said, very low-key kind of a thing where, like, she's just kind of scribbling, and then sometimes she'll spell out a word. And yeah, it's right in that sweet spot that I love, because I love, like, ghosts content in general. I follow Nick and Ryan, which is a channel on YouTube where they go to like supposedly haunted places, and they never ham it up. They just try to go in with kind of like a good measure of good humor, measure of skepticism and everything, and they don't ham it up too much. It's just like little things you're like, oh maybe.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the kind of atmosphere that this scene hit in this movie, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I think that they do a good job of kind of... I think that this film, these haunting sort of things could, like, really kind of beg credulity, or, like, at very worst, be incredibly goofy. But something as simple as, like, a ball bouncing down a staircase or a wheelchair moving is incredibly disturbing in the right context. And I think the same kind of vocabulary is applied here with the medium, where all she has is like her pencil and paper, or like that weird fucking cone that I don't fully understand what the purpose of that was. Like, she keeps asking for communication and it's just like wobbling. You're like, well, how is it supposed to, like, I don't know, you know. And they punctuate that with like the wine glass like flying across the room, so you get a fun like end cap to it all. But it's really understated and still unnerving.
Well, first of all, the ghost cone. You don't know the ghost cone?
To the classic.
Yeah, the classic
ghost cones.
I mean, you don't have one? I have one right here.
I have the off-brand version.
the
Vuvuzela.
The Boo-Boo-Zella.
God damn it.
I will not apologize for who I am. Anyways, in the seance, they learn that the ghost, instead of being this girl that they had suspected before, was actually a boy named Joseph Carmichael. And they're like, wait a minute, Carmichael, that's the name of the senator that appeared earlier in the movie. And it turns out there's this big plot that unfolded where Joseph Carmichael was his mother's father, had died and left the boy an inheritance, skipping the father. But if he died before he reached 21, then the inheritance would be given to charity. And Joseph is very sick. He probably wasn't going to live to be 21, so his father drowned him and then adopted another boy and pretended he was Joseph, sent him away to Europe, so when he came back all grown up, then nobody would realize a switcheroo had been made. And thus, this is the Changeling.
You have a title, folks.
There we go. Title drop. And so basically what the ghost is trying to do, the ghost is trying to is pretty mad that they were killed for money, as anybody would logically be. And so it's trying to I guess get the story out there, to try to get a sense of retribution, justice for this. And so he's trying to do all this stuff. I have to note that this is a very strong ghost. In terms
this ghost has can haunt 2 locations, psychically manifest out of a Catholic medallion. It's pretty. It can create fires. It's powerful and it's angry. I think you really noted when we were kind of chatting about this earlier, and it's interesting because I think that a lot of good ghost stories make this moment where they transition from being scary because you don't know what's going on and these strange, frightening things are happening, to also being kind of sad. I think Del Toro is incredibly good at that in the various iterations of the ghost stories he's done. I think this film does that in the enactment of the drowning and stuff, but the response to it, rather than being kind of wholly tragic, is wrathful, to be honest. And it's interesting how the film builds in this kind of, you're talking about things like doors opening, and that happens that's the first suggestion of the haunting at the opening, but in that case it's kind of this weird curiosity to the door opening. It's scary because it's fucking weird and shouldn't happen, but it's tentative, whereas towards the end, when the ghost is pissed off about everything that's happening, there's these slamming doors and there's this wrathful anger to it, which is again kind of giving a personification to the ghost, which makes for interesting kind of interpretation.
Yeah, I think what really gets me is that John, for this whole story, is joined by a woman named Claire, who works at the Historical Society. The two are trying to unfold this mystery together, and she comes to the house. She's kind of drawn inside, and the ghost takes on John's voice to try to get her into the attic room. And then she gets there and she's I think the ghost was trying to be well, you get up here, look at this, do something about it. And then she gets up there and she's oh, I don't know. And then the ghost kind of flips out basically, and the wheelchair starts chasing her.
Yeah, that wheelchair scene is really scary. It could have been so stupid, but they pulled it off.
Yeah, it's it's really good. It's because it's right at that point where it could have been super goofy, but now you're oh shit, oh the ghost is Casper's not friendly anymore.
Yeah, I think just like Trish Van Devere, the woman playing Claire, did a really good job of like this kind of like catatonic terror at that point, like during that thing or earlier when she just sees like the wheelchair kind of just on the landing of the staircase or whatnot. It's convincing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so much. The acting in this movie all around was so good. Like, again, like it's one of those things where, there's been so many ghost stories since then that it's easy to kind of look at this movie and be like, oh, it's like, I've seen this or that before. But again, keeping in mind how old it is and also just how well done it is, it really helps it to shine through everything else that's come out since then.
Yeah, it's not like, The Conjuring or It or something where there's like a nun like running at the camera and like screaming or whatever. It's very understated, like almost quaint, but not really.
Yeah, it's like, because when you make it understated, then it makes it feel a little bit more accessible. Like, as much as I do enjoy like the first Conjuring movie, like, the point where like the chair comes off the floor, flips upside down, starts like dancing on the ceiling, you're like, okay, this is a movie. Whereas like
all I need is George C. Scott like angrily ripping apart a closet.
There you go. So as the truth comes out, I find like the Joseph Carmichael's body in an old defunct well beneath someone's house. After Joseph scares the shit out of the girl living in that room twice.
She was like the short end of the stick of the whole situation, to be honest.
And then they find also like the medallion, like the baptism medal that he was buried with. And John takes that, confronts the senator with it. And one of the things that's interesting is, so with Senator Carmichael, I feel like there's a bit of like cognitive dissonance there with him, because he seemed like genuinely distraught at the accusation that his father was a murderer. But at the same time, he was also actively trying to stop this investigation, like interfere with it.
Yeah, maybe it's because he looked really like Mitch McConnell. I was not very sympathetic toward him, but it was a little both sides, because like at the one hand he's dispatching like the SPD chief of police to like interfere and stop this whole situation, but then he's also like, when John actually does have a one-on-one with him, seem like difficult in like kind of how he's parsing like this sudden revelation about his father not being not being his father literally, but also being pretty shady.
I feel like, to me, that's not like because it's easy to be like, oh, that's a mistake on behalf of the script. But I feel like it is something that psychologically I could see where he has like always in his mind, like maybe he kind of knew, or like he knew that something terrible happened, like something was not on the up and up with the whole situation, but at the same time he just pretended that it didn't happen. This mindset of like, no, nothing happened, everything is normal. Well, why don't we check if it's normal? No, don't look at it, please.
Right. And you kind of get the sense that there's this larger cabal like around him, because there's like the Seattle Historical Society, and there's like Minnie, or who, like the fucking greatest like evil librarian type. Like, she's exquisite. She's maybe my favorite character of the whole movie. God, what a monster. Like, and like, so you get this, and the police captain and whatnot, like, you get the sense that like maybe there's this greater superstructure kind of like that has a vested interest in keeping him kind of there as the real Senator Carmichael. Like, it's not the most important aspect of the film, but it's like something that's kind of there in the periphery. So like, yeah, there is room for this sort of ambiguity to it.
Yeah. And in the end, like he, you know, in this ending then, and this is what we were talking about before that I brought up and then dropped because I don't know how to organize my thoughts when I talk. You know, he, kind of looks at this medallion and gets this vision of going into the mansion. And it's interesting because John also sees the senator walking into the mansion. So it's like the senator, I don't know, like has this out of body experience that John can see. It's ghost rules. It's ghost rules. Like he is brought to the attic room and he sees the vision of the murder taking place. He's horrified, and then he, back in his actual mansion, drops dead. Heart attack, I believe it was.
Yeah, it's like a coronary. That's one of the things that I really like about the film is how it doesn't explicitly like lay these things out for you. It kind of like sets them out there and lets you sort of make of it what you will. Like it does have this sort of poetic nature to the haunting. That's, the haunting is like this unresolved sort of cry into the void that wants to be resolved and can only be resolved through the destruction of everything, being the house, the well, the senator's life, this faux senator's life. But like how it's interpreting that is kind of very obtuse, and there's no literal aspect to that, which makes a really interesting sort of storytelling.
Well, Raina, don't you know that like for a movie to be objectively good, we have to have these things explicitly laid out to us?
I was rather sad that there wasn't like a narration at the end that was like, and Senator Carmichael was laid to rest after a tragic infarction.
A tragic infarct?
MI, heart attack.
Oh,
what have you?
Oh, sorry, I'm not a doctor person.
Sorry, I was going off the deep end there.
You gotta keep your words to 2 syllables or less around me.
Keep it singular.
But yeah, so the film ends like the senator, facing the music, and this kind of builds into again the idea that I have where he didn't really know about, or at least he didn't want to look at it for his whole life, and so finally this is him seeing it and being like, okay, accepting that everything he's gotten in his life, all of his wealth, all of his power, all of his privilege, was gotten through bloody, terrible means. And it's him accepting that.
Or at least being confronted by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one tragedy that isn't like the people who really should pay the price don't, in any sense that at least we see within the film.
Right, it's like because the father, Mr. Carmichael, he's dead and buried, and it does kind of play into this idea of like where like true justice still hasn't been like, perhaps can never really be achieved by that, because the last shot of the movie is the ashes of the manor, and the music box opens by itself and starts playing again. It's like it hasn't gone away.
From just a poetic image.
And to kind of get to the ultimate theme of this again, I feel like kind of succinctly boiled down what we've been talking about. I feel like the theme is about how crimes committed in this past, especially these horrible crimes of greed, can't be hidden forever. The ghost is that crime, and how it's been unredressed, and how it will eventually boil over and cause even more chaos.
Yeah, there's a ripple effect.
Yeah, and the reckoning has to be paid with interest.
Absolutely. like a very classic sort of ghost story. Again, just kind of like using these supernatural elements to kind of talk about something that a lot of us experience in some form of or other throughout our lives.
Do you have any other thoughts about the Changeling?
We touched on a lot of the important elements. I will just say that, like, as per usual, this film was not... It's set in Seattle, but shot primarily in probably Vancouver, BC, maybe Victoria, which is tradition because Seattle permitting is not as tax favorable, I guess, compared to Canada. Though they're working on it, there's this weird new thing going on in town. But, like, I will say that of all this, like, quote-unquote Seattle set, like, films and TV series and whatnot, this is, like, pretty good at, like, doing a whole surrogate thing. Like, the mansion does feel like it would belong in, like, Magnolia or something. Like, it has the right kind of feel to it and stuff. But, like, it's definitely better than, like, Megan or Malignant. Like, that's New Zealand, guys. Like, no. But yeah, like, I feel like I can, like, like, this is the least Cinema Cincy for me, is, like, a super asshole local who is always like, well, that's not how it would be. And it's also just really fascinating in, like, the sequences that are shot in Seattle do feel like it's really fascinating to see how much the city has grown since 1980. Like, when you go up to the senator's office, and his office is in the Rainier Tower, or the Beaver Building, as anyone I know calls it.
The Beaver
like,
Building.
If you look out across, yeah, because it's like literally like there's like, it looks like it's an inverted obelisk. Like, there's like the ground floor, and then like it looks like the George Washington Monument in DC, like, upside down. And someone decided that in a city that is prone to earthquakes, that was a good engineering decision. It looks like a beaver was, like, eating away at it and ready to, like, knock it over.
Oh, no.
But, like, if you look out at the skyline, I'll send you a picture or something. If you look at the skyline, like, it's tiny. Like, there's no skyscrapers around it. Like, it's interesting. Just kind of...
For me, a similar thing happened when I was watching, and this, I promise to make this a very quick tangent here, when I was watching Sicario, because the opening of that movie is in Glendale, Arizona, which is very close to where I grew up. And I just remember seeing it, I'm like, that's not what Glendale looks like. At least not the Glendale that I was very familiar with.
It's always funny looking at a movie about a place that you know and just going, wait, is that what they think this looks like? Like, Megan, we got jump scared. I was with some friends at the theater, and, like, the Seattle skyline, like, pops in. It was like, wait, is it set here? It doesn't look like it.
Megan is closing in on your location. There's nothing you can do.
There's nothing I can do.
Anyways, shall we bring our discussion over to England then?
Let's go to the other side of the pond.
Ghosts are real. This much I know.
The daughter of a successful business magnate, Edith is content to live that Joe March lifestyle and try to make it as a writer. But everything changes when emo dreamboat Sir Thomas Sharp pulls into town in an effort to drum up funds for his clay mining outfit on his estate in northern England. It only takes the perfect waltz with him to sweep Edith off her feet, much to the chagrin of her father and Thomas's sister, Lucille. Sure, Lucille is a little overprotective, but otherwise, she and Thomas have a very normal level of affection for one another. After tragedy strikes and pushes Edith further into Thomas's arms, it's only a matter of time before they're back at the Sharp estate. While Edith is no stranger to loss, this place is even more steeped in tragedy and intrigue than she could possibly imagine. What secrets are locked away deep in the chambers of both Allerdale Hall and Lucille's heart? When even Buffalo, New York seems like a favorable place, you know you're in trouble. I do appreciate the little jab at Buffalo there.
I have harrowing memories of having to go. My grandparents lived there when I was like young, it's just going through the winter. It's like an industrial fucking wasteland. I'm like, when Del Toro's like portraying it as this like golden, idyllic wonder, I'm like, sweetie, maybe back in the 1800s, but
before the Rust Belt took effect, back when, it was.
There we go.
It's actually funny because like living in upstate New York right now, I walk along the waterfront, and it's like, oh yes, this was actually a major thoroughway in across the continent, because people would come up here and then go to the Erie Canal, and it's like, oh, people came up here, and now like people only come here for the university or on their way to Niagara Falls.
It's no Albany.
So Crimson Peak. Now I know this might come as a shock to you and to our audience here, but I really, really like Guillermo del Toro's movies.
No.
I know, it's a shocker. And this one, and here's the, because, well, I don't think this is his best movie, which reads as, I don't think it's literal, actual perfection. I do think it's his most beautiful movie. I feel like the designs of everything, the way it looks, the way it feels, the music to everything, the costumes, the sets, it's all just so sumptuous.
Yeah, I think like it really grew on me. When I first watched it, I was like, oh, that's pretty solid. That's okay. And then like I think since I've really come to love, again, style elements are so important here, and I think like I could talk for 78 hours about like the use of color alone, for example, in this film, and he just like this clearly just knew exactly what he wanted on the screen. He had the right people to help realize that, and an amazing cast and everything. So it's just such a like a well realized vision.
I remember because when I first saw it, I was a little confused because much like The Changeling, this movie has a mystery element to it, but it does show more of its hand up front. Like we see that Thomas and Lucille, are like talking to each other secretly. They're like, oh, we have like, just do this, do that. And it's kind of like it's showing up front that they have evil intentions. And at first I was like, well, that's like kind of like a weird thing to do. I was like, I think that would be a big twist. But when you see the whole thing, when you've seen the movie and you see it all in perspective, you see that the movie is built more around... It's built kind of around Thomas, actually. And this interesting kind of arc that he goes through. I've actually been meaning to do a video of this on my own channel, and I've always been kind of struggling like, oh, what angle am I going to take? But I think preparing for this discussion here has helped me realize, oh, here's what I could talk about that I'd be really passionate about saying. So because of you, there will be a full video about this someday. Probably 2 years from now.
Yeah, like I think the twist here more comes from like the depths to which their collusion and relationship goes. You don't ever expect something like that. This film really reminds me of the Park Chan-wook film The Handmaiden in that kind of regard. It's this very gothic romantic film that's kind of twisty and turny and surrounding this like secretive family that are really appropriate with each other and stuff. But I think you're right in like kind of we get this sort of anchor point in Thomas. Like Edith is the protagonist of the film and we're kind of in her perception the whole time, but it becomes more about her. Like it's the ultimate like I can fix you story, I guess.
And one thing I will kind of point out is that there's this really interesting connection between this movie and The Devil's Backbone.
Yeah.
Because in The Devil's Backbone, which is another ghost story that Guillermo del Toro made, There's this line from one of the boys at the orphanage who remarks that he was told that around this area, the sun is so hot that, and the earth is like so dry, like this area traps ghosts that they can't escape from it.
Mm-hmm.
And in Crimson Peak, Edith's original like sweetheart, like who is in Buffalo, played by Charlie Hunnam, I think is his name. Hunnam?
Yeah. In number 5.
He is showing her like slides and everything about how there's places on the planet where the soil will like have imprints of people who've passed away, people who are, ghosts. And I don't know, I think that's like a really interesting element that gets borrowed over here.
Yeah, I think Del Toro is one of those creatives that like has like a very set vocabulary, and it's not like in a way to be limited, but like it's just like he's very interested in these type of stories. And like even on an aesthetic level, I was seeing parallels with like certainly with Thomas as it goes, but I think elsewhere like you get that kind of like weird like blood coming from a wound like kind of floats upwards, which was also the same in Devil's Backbone. Or like the really interesting like chiaroscuro, the deep pools of shadow and stuff we see in Chronos, and these like shafts of light and pools of darkness. And again here it's really interesting handling of the moody sequences. So I think throughout his filmography you can really kind of like start to kind of draw this like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia like conspiracy map of stuff, and just kind of how do things feed in on each other, and kind of how does he meditate on the same ideas and from different angles. Devil's Backbone is about the Spanish Civil War, and here we're like more like English Gothic romance and stuff. So how can you talk about the same thing from different perspectives?
Yeah, and this does take on a very interesting direction with how it approaches these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So over the course of this story, Edith lives in Allerdale Hall, which is the... I don't know these things. I'm not British. I don't know. Like
He's a baronet, I think.
The baronet, like what? I don't know. Ancestral home. The thing that they got because they inherited a title from their parents. Yeah. The Allerdale Hall is their massive estate. There we go. Thank you. That they're trying to build this like clay mining operation in, and he marries Edith, who inherits her father's wealth after her father is murdered by a mysterious person that we don't know at first.
Oh no. So a little giallo. You have like the black glove killer and like the blood, and the murder scene is like gloriously brutal.
Yeah, like that's like holy shit. And what was I trying to say? So in her time at the manor, Edith she sees these apparitions who are trying to reach out to her, and there's actually a lot of elements that come from the Changeling, like a ball being tossed to her from the shadows,
the wheelchair.
There's a wheelchair hidden in a room.
I feel like the ball was also like a call out to The Shining, like that specific shot where like it kind of it's like the camera's like kind of a high angle looking at her on the floor, and then just like rolls in middle of the frame. That was like almost identical to the scene where like Danny like has the ball roll in. So like he's just like keeping on the homage.
You gotta do those callbacks.
Exactly.
Callbacks.
But he does it in a good way. It's like
yes,
reverence rather than derivatization or something. But yeah, like even on a thematic level, like or like a story level, like you have inheritance, you have these kind of naughty issues of money changing hands being kind of a layer of earthly motivation for this. You have like the supernatural tragedy that's occurring kind of juxtaposed against this, like, we want the money from this lady, so what do we have to do? What crimes do we have to commit to get this to happen?
Exactly. And over the course of the movie, Edith is led by the ghost to different pieces of evidence, and she realizes that she is not Thomas's first wife, that other women have been here before, they've been killed, so that their money can be taken. And what's interesting is that ultimately the motivation is, and we've been kind of beating around the bush with this, so we'll just get right to it. Thomas and Lucille, they got a little sweet home Alabama, and part of this kind of stems from, like, when they were kids, like, their mother always, like, shut them in. They were so closed off from everyone else that, like, they didn't see anyone else.
Right.
And this starts to kind of put together a very interesting idea here, because, you know, their mother was a cruel woman. They say this, and that gets passed on to them, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Through the way she treated them, to the point where Lucille actually killed their mother. She killed Edith's father, and it's almost like they feel like it's them against the world. Like, they feel separate from everyone else. Mm-hmm. And the character names even kind of reflect this, because Edith's full name is Edith Cushing, which sounds like cushion, something soft, something, you know, pleasant. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, Lucille Thomas, their last name is Sharp, sharp, blade, something that harms other people, that is meant to harm other people.
Right. I think Del Toro is really good at that kind of, like, it's so close to being, like, freshman English, like, I just read the Scarlet Letter kind of situation, right? But he does it in such a way that's so underhanded and just kind of, like, passed off. Like, even that, like, you have Sharp and Cushion, you have the butterfly against the moth imagery, and, like, he explicitly tells you all of that, but, like, you kind of just fall under his spell and just go along with it.
Yeah, it's like, it's very much, it's not always the most subtle, but it's compelling,
Yeah, it's confidently handed out.
Yeah, that's what I really love about his filmography, is that he will, he's very much a heart on the sleeve, and I take that directly from an interview he did once. I put that in a video a couple years back. Very hard on the sleeve. He just makes these very earnest expressions of things he wants to say. Mm-hmm. And there's just a beautiful poetry to it. Like, the imagery he creates. The imagery in this movie, oh my god!
The first, 5 minutes alone are just a masterclass in, like, mise en scène.
Yeah, it's just the colors of it. We'll get more into the color theory of everything in a bit. Just, oh my god, the way this movie looks, the imagery it puts on, it just creates these striking moments. I can just close my eyes and I can imagine them. Mm-hmm. What were we talking about? So Lucille, Thomas, getting too close with each other.
Getting friendly.
And again, they feel like it's them against the world. But over the course of the movie, Edith starts to draw Thomas towards the light, where he starts to think, maybe us, holding up in this decaying, decrepit mansion, trying to scavenge money from desperate women around the world, maybe this isn't the life we have to lead. Maybe this isn't who I have to be.
Exactly. It's kind of this, like, the start of this redemption arc for Thomas. much to the chagrin of Lucille, who is...
Yeah.
Jessica Chastain is very good at being a crazy person in this movie. Even just like there's a moment where she like has to like hug, I think either Thomas or Edith, and like her just visible reluctance. I'm like, girl, same. I don't want to fucking touch people.
Yeah, and that's because, you know, Lucille is she's very steadfast. Like, no, this is where we belong. This is who we are.
Exactly.
And, you know, Thomas has to kind of slowly kind of work around her. Like, you know, when she closes the door, he tells Edith, like, don't eat this poisoned thing. You know, he has to kill Charlie Hunnam, but he says, you know, you're a doctor. Where can I stab you where it won't kill you? And then I'll come back for you later. So like you can see him starting to more and more plot against his sister, but tragically, at the end of everything, you know, he accidentally oversteps because he's like, you know, like we can have a new life, you know, and and Edith can be part of it. And Lucille is so distraught by this that she stabs him
in the face, like the most like harrowing way possible. The gore in this film is like shocking at points, but it's really effective.
Yeah, it's the designs of the ghosts are like so horrifying, and it creates this really interesting effect because, you know, obviously Edith sees them and you're like, oh, holy shit, that's horrifying. But as it goes on, you get to feel that trademark Del Toro sympathy, the empathy for these twisted beings who are trapped here.
Right. Like, Edith is akin to John Russell, kind of this individual who's experienced tragedy in her past, and she's kind of primed to be a filter for that in this new setting in a much more visceral way. But the ghosts were in the Changeling, where the circumstances were really tragic and sad. The like manifestation was much more angry. In here, it's kind of, there's this pitiful nature to that once you get past the initial kind of like jarring nature of like this thing kind of crawling down the hallway towards you, which those hallways were amazing. Like all the spikes and shit. You're like, what psychopath made this? But I love it.
Yeah. And you know, and again, like the color on this, at first all to kind of like go back to this is kind of related as well, but when Thomas gets stabbed by Lucille, with the wound being in his face, it naturally creates this thing where, like, you know, a tear runs down like his dying eye, and it's a tear of blood, and it's like, oh, I see what you did there. I see what you're doing there. Again, the movie just has a great visual poetry to it that just gets me right to my core.
Yeah, it's not subtle, but it's very committed and thorough, and I think commendable for that.
So Lucille kills Thomas, and then she tries to kill Edith, but Edith fights back and kills Lucille, and she's helped by the ghost of Thomas appearing and distracting Lucille. Now, another thing that's interesting is the ghosts have like different color schemes to them.
Yeah.
So there's most of the dead wives, like the people who've been killed in Crimson Peak, are red ghosts, marked by blood, signifying, like, you know, they're violent ends. And then there's two black ghosts in the movie, which are interesting. So we have Lucille at the very end of the movie, like the last shot is her lingering in Crimson Peak, still playing the piano. But there's also Edith's mother, who at the very beginning of the movie comes to her and says, "Beware of Crimson Peak."
Yeah, that was the one moment that, because you have your red ghosts, which again you're tying to like the violence of the killings here. I think it also ties it to the Allerdale clay, this red clay. The house literally bleeds in the form of clay, and so I think it's a nice double metaphor there. You have Thomas as a white ghost, so maybe a redeemed ghost or something like that.
Yeah.
But then like the black was confusing to me because like I took the blackness of Edith's mother to be like pestilence or illness because she dies of black cholera at the start, which I don't think, I know cholera exists. I've never heard of black cholera, but maybe it's the thing. So I was like, but Lucille doesn't die of illness. She gets fucking brutally killed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't have a strong hypothesis as to what the black nature of Edith's specter is.
I think that because here's the thing. So because in the final monologue of the movie, Edith is like, repeats, the ghosts are real. This much I know. And she talks about how ghosts can be like the personification of emotions. And she lists a few of them up. And the last one she deals with is, and even love, those they never go away. And when she says that, we see Lucille's ghost.
Right.
And it's just kind of like this kind of tragic thing because obviously, getting a little too close with family members is not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing. But I feel like in the end, like that was like still the only thing she had to cling to. And
yeah. Or even just like Allerdale Hall is all she had, all she knows.
Yeah, so like that's like something she's still connected to. She doesn't want to let go of it. And that would kind of also connect with Edith's mother, who perhaps lingers out of love, being like, she saw into the future with her ghostly powers and said, oh no, Crimson Peak, bad things are going to happen there.
Yeah, I suppose them being black also does kind of intrinsically link those two figures as sort of a portent of doom and like a outcome or something.
Yeah. Poor Papa Cushing doesn't get a ghost.
No.
Was it Jim Beaver? Is that?
Yeah.
He doesn't get a ghost.
No, we do get other like head smashed in ghosts, but not him.
And then you also want to talk about the color gold and how that was used in this.
Oh, yeah, I think color in general is really interesting. I was like trying to come up with some sort of grand unified theory for it, because like you're saying, the ghosts are very kind of typified by color, but also just the film in general. Like it opens with white in the snow, which we usually associate with innocence, and Mia Wasikowska is like dressed in white. But then the second color that's introduced is the red of blood. So you're like, even in minute one, saying this juxtaposition of innocence and violence, right? But I think there are two colors that are really important to the film, aside from the ghosts, and that those are gold and green. And I think gold, there's a couple instances I can't account for, but gold kind of symbolizes buffalo and symbolizes buffalo. The earthly paradise that is buffalo. Oh God. Okay, it's a mixed
more
metaphor.
of like a gray beige nowadays. But in the 1800s, back when it was
great
like
when you're just squelching through the mud. There's like that, like the color timing of buffalo is very golden, and it kind of codes it as being this, her home and everything she knows and somewhere she loves. And then in those scenes you get like the sharps are very like black, and like they have like these crazy like smoked sunglasses and stuff, and so they're out of place there in this very warm and welcoming environment. And then once you get to Allerdale Hall, Edith like continues to wear gold in some capacity, but she's like the only aspect that anything is golden any farther, and usually she's kind of wearing like a gold like under like a slip or something, and she's kind of enveloping it in black, so it's like this malicious influence of the sharps is kind of overwhelming her like nature, but it still kind of remains in this sort of quavering small regard, and the only time that it becomes the dominant color again is in the love scene between Thomas and Edith when they're kind of snowed in and stuff, and you get the candlelight and everything. So I think kind of gold represents this essential goodness that Edith holds within her and can be allowed to blossom at points, but is usually suppressed. And then you also get these really deep, interesting greens, which sometimes like works on an aesthetic level. Like green is such an interesting color to kind of use as like a nighttime hue, because like usually you think of like black or blue or whatever, maybe a deep purple. But, like green can kind of also work in that, but it I think represents kind of the uncanny within a film, within a scene, because you'll get these sequences where like part of the frame, like I remember one time when after like there's the ball and she like kind of Edith recedes in shame, like she goes up into the space which is green, which is up into her room where she's been visited by ghosts, or you have in Allerdale Hall these deep pools of green at points, and it's just like the use of color is kind of this, again, it's Scarlet Letter, but it's also really like committed, and there's like this solid through line, which is so fascinating. Kind of you start noticing that and you're like, okay, when does it next going to crop up, and am I a crazy person, or is this like something that's being used intentionally? And again, it's that there's so much focus on detail and intent and whatnot that makes this an interesting film to experience.
Yeah, I feel like there's just so much here that you can unfold and discover. You know, there's a lot of meaning that gets. It's like a puff pastry. There's so many layers to it.
Mm-hmm. It's a baklava.
Guillermo del Toro's finest baklava. But yeah, you know, and I feel like, again, to kind of, you know, to pull together all the different things that we were talking about, at least from my perspective, I feel like this ghost here, where the Changeling had much more of a theme of like, you know, crimes trying to be covered up that just erupt out later. I feel like this movie has been more of the theme of overcoming what can seem to be an unchangeable inner nature.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you had touched on this before, whereas the ghost in the Changeling is a lot like angrier, wrathful. I like that word that you used. The ghosts in Crimson Peak seem more concerned about getting Edith to the truth or getting her to safety.
There's a benevolence to the spirits, even if they're kind of freaky, like when you don't want something outside of your like closet door just sort of pressing in. They care.
They care. But yeah, any other thoughts about Crimson Peak? Either on its own or how it's how it's in dialogue with the Changeling?
Yeah, I think like we've touched on kind of like the broad strokes. One sequence in both that I find really interesting, you brought it up earlier, is kind of there's like a like listening to recordings scene in both, which is closely interrelated. In the Changeling, you get the kind of like, it's like Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation or something, where George C. Scott is like listening to like the recording of the seance and like discovering these ghostly voices, and he's like, I love a scene where there's like vintage recording technology and they're like using it. It's very tactile, and he has to like reel back the tape, like listen to it again and like stop and start. And then in Crimson Peak you get the scene where Edith is listening to the wax cylinders and stuff of the like incriminating, you know, past or whatever, which is kind of fun to like see. Like there are the overt nods, like the rubber ball in the wheelchair and stuff, but then there's also kind of a little bit more subtle stuff that's like, oh yeah, these are like still, you know, recording is in a sense like if if a haunting is in a way a recording in a space of a tragedy that unfolds, like you're recording that to another level and kind of parsing it further. So it's interesting to sort of see how these tropes, if you will, play out.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, that's something that's always really interesting to see, because seeing how, you know, Del Toro has specifically cited The Changeling as a huge influence on him, it's really cool to see how he took this, you know, the idea of, like, you know, these kind of settings, these ideas, this iconography, and remixed it to be something similar, has like something like the same DNA in it, but still tells a different story, has a different thing to say. And I love that so much.
Yeah, no, I think skilled filmmakers like have a hefty repertoire of inspiration, but they can use it in a way which is furthering the dialogue rather than simply repeating the same sentence over again.
Yeah, kind of like, you know, with you know, Scorsese, you know, he likes to tell a story of somebody who climbs up to the top of the world and then has a reckoning, basically.
Is he coming out with something new?
Is he coming out with something?
He might be. I don't know.
I don't know.
I've heard Leonardo
is,
screaming
maybe
in the distance, so maybe.
Well, if he did, we could talk about it next week, perhaps, for the podcast episode next week. You know, I guess we could.
Okay, I have to stock up on my Depends first, though.
Killers of the Flower Moon, more like Killer of My Bladder.
It's like I always have to strategically dehydrate before one of those movies.
With that note, yeah, we will be back next week to talk about Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. And I hope you've enjoyed this little look here at two wonderful haunted house ghost stories that we recommend you checking out. So until next time, I'm Daniel Goldhorn.
I'm Reynard.
And we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Happy spooky season.
Woo!